Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Prey 2022. So, just in case people do not know, the Predator has a certain set of weaponry. Like, of course, the blade that you see here is actually called the wrist blade. And eventually we have, like, the Predator who has these spears that are called combi sticks. And, like, there is also the self-destruction device, which we end up seeing, again, being used in this film also. It looks slightly different within the use of this movie, but it's somewhat similar. But I just want people to know that when I kind of use these certain words to explain certain times in which that the predators go on and kill people, um, as well as there being some new weaponry that the predator uses in this film that is really awesome. Like the shield that he ends up using, or eventually there's this like net that goes on and like Swiss cheeses people. That was pretty cool. But the whole reason why I'm focusing upon that in the very beginning of this is because this Predator really has to rely on the action sequences to sell itself, because this story is very thin and very weak. It has probably the coolest Predator in probably the worst Predator movie as far as story goes. Even though probably in the Predator that came out after the 2010 one, like that story was just like, hey, let's fight it out because there's not much else going on there. Um, I honestly like the 2010 Predator, like that one's my favorite one. But I also like the ones that came before that, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger one, and of course the Glover one that came after that. I want to just say Glover one because really I don't remember if it's Danny or Donald, and I always get those confused. So I just say Glover to just go on, and I think it was Danny from what I remember. Anyways, so for this movie, what is this story about? Even though I didn't like it, I think it's a bad movie, but I think people will probably go on and see it regardless. It's one of those kind of slow build kind of films. I'm like, oh, great. So we have to like re-earn everything because we've seen so many of these movies before, but we just have to re-earn all this stuff as if it's brand new to us, because I'm sure for Predator fans, there's always a new one coming somewhere down the road. So eventually they're just like, well, we're going to focus on like the newcomers instead of the people that have seen every freaking movie, even though when really looking at it, everybody's watching every single Predator movie to get to this point, or rewatching any of the older ones because they enjoy those more. Anyways, so for this story, we have a character named Naru who is wanting to go on and join this group uh, of her own tribesmen who are going on this big hunt. They end up having their own way of saying the big hunt, but then they end up like explaining it easier to just say, oh, it's like it's just the big hunt, but they have their own name for it. And I don't want to butcher that name by saying it. We also have Naru, who is to come into finding out about this orange flower that is to have some medical purposes within this film, and that will actually come into play for this film. And so with this story, Naru eventually is to sneak out to be with her friend Tabe, who, and luckily I went through the movie again to just kind of double check the pronunciation of this name, because I know there are several names here that I probably might butcher because I don't know all of them. Like specifically the Predator, I think when I'm gonna have to say the word Predator, I'm probably gonna be butchering that word the most out of every other one of these names. Everything else is gonna be easy, but the Predator name is gonna be difficult. I know for a fact. So, so everyone else's name is gonna be the easiest thing, but Predator, not so much. Anyways, so we have Naru that eventually is to be this inventive girl who is to figure out that she can go on and tie a string to her tomahawk and be able to like retrieve her tomahawk that way. And I was like, okay, like I'm liking certain things about Naru. I already really liked Amber Mid Thunder anyways, because I was like, man, this character, like I like this girl immediately. But I just wish there was a better story for her to be involved in for this film, that didn't feel like a waste of my time. Um, but eventually, we also, when the Predator drops upon this planet, we eventually have him slowly but surely get to the humans. He doesn't kill humans right away. He ends up killing other things. So if you are to be a animal pet lover of some kind, more than likely this movie may not be for you, but I'm explaining this because eventually people might like pets or animals or whatever. And so putting that out there right now. So, but then eventually the Predator and Naru, like it seems to take like half of the movie to get to this build up to then have this eventual fight out where people are to die and so on and so forth. And honestly, a really interesting and creative way to also take out the Predator in this movie. And it doesn't come down to the self-destruction device as it always usually comes through most of those films. Um, but yeah, and they also have to come up with a creative way for Naru to be able to hide herself, like to hide her body heat. Like, of course, we have it in other Predator movies where Arnold was to go on and find that mud and eventually hide himself. Where in the 2010 version, we of course had Adrian Brody's character who is surrounded by that fire, and he is to hide his heat signature that way. Um, like we have to go in this movie and have to come up with a unique way of going on and eventually hiding Naru's body heat for this film, which honestly feels weak, but it is what it is with this story. It has to be what it has to be. It's a weaker variation to hide herself, but like there is some other interesting things here. So with that said, let's go on into that double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one because it's spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this film, we have Naru who is talking to Tabei, and we have this story that Tabei delivers about him going on this hunt and eventually having this whole thing about his bowstring and how it got wet and all these horrible things. And Naru is getting so tired of listening to this story that while she has her bow an arrow cocked to fire upon this bird, she starts falling asleep while hearing this guy's story. All of a sudden, to have Tabei, who goes on and hits and kills this bird, and Tabei was telling Naru, it's like, well, why didn't you go on and take that bird down? And Naru is like, well, I wanted it to circle back, and now you have to go and walk all that way to get that bird. Like, good luck with that. So, eventually Naru comes home to, I think, eventually talk to her mother. And so, come to find out, Naru is to know about the orange flower that is to be used for medication. And so Naru is talking to this woman how like the chief is to have this bad knee and that maybe they're gonna have to like medicate it, and this woman is to tell Naru that it's like, well, I think it's beyond that, I think it's like probably infected and he's probably gonna die. So Tabei comes in with, of course, the bird and everything like that. So Naru ends up cutting half of this fish and gives it to Petsu, who I believe is her dog for this film. So whenever I say Petsu, that of course is to be the dog. I guess that means pet. So And also Naru and I believe her mother are going on and talking about how, uh, like there's certain like smart animals that can't easily be trained and so on and so forth. Making jokes probably about how like men are hard to be trained, ha 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 ha, because gender jokes, right? So, so we go on into this story, and so Tebey is to go off onto the big hunt, as of course stubbornly Naru will be sneaking after to follow them, and so Naru is to tell Tebey that she was to go on and see the Thunderbird as this symbol that she needs to go on this hunt with Tebey. And it seems that these guys are not interested in having her going, even to the point of taking her tomahawk away from her to realize that there is some weird string upon it. But eventually, Naru ends up getting her tomahawk back. So, come to find out, the Thunderbird is not a Thunderbird afterwards. It's really the alien ship that is to land to release this predator out onto this world. So the predator is to go on and eventually at first find this wolf and try to attack it. And it goes on and slices and dices this wolf with, I'm assuming, his wrist blade. So we have this wolf kind of fall apart and flop over. And so we end up having the predator collecting its skull because, of course, the predator loves to collect trophies because that's just the thing it does. So the next thing that we end up seeing is that a snake is to go on and eventually try to go after a rat or a mouse or a rat. So the snake goes on and is to attack this rat, but then the snake, of course, can sense the predator, and eventually the snake tries to attack the predator, and the predator kills it, and we end up getting, like, just, man, this predator is just going out for everything. To the point of eventually Naru is to see the snake skin, or to see the snake body, and just be like, oh my god, this is so weird. To eventually let Tebey know that there must be something here. Plus, also, I think Naru is to eventually see some bear traps that are to be lined up, which are actually to be connected to the European guys who I believe speak French. People can correct me. There is a little bit of time where there is certain kind of languages, like especially for the European guys, most of the time I don't know what they're saying for most of this movie. And so that really is annoying that they can't give us like the dialogue for these characters, and I'm annoyed with that. But I just have to deal with it because what else is new? I could have probably gone on and probably went on to, excuse me, I probably could have went on to eventually a certain app that probably did have the dialogue, but I'm like, with how this movie isn't as great as I thought it would be, I didn't think it mattered. Like I was like, whatever they're saying, I could really care less. So, but anyways, we have Naru who joins Tebey and the rest of the Native Americans here to eventually go on this hunt. And so Tebey is telling Naru that Naru is definitely going to have to earn her keep here and really find a really good animal for them to go on and hunt down here. We even have at one point where the guys are easily going and taking down possums because it seems that the possums are all afraid and they're going to a certain direction to get out of this forest because, of course, they know what's coming, which is, of course, the predator. Because the predator is basically killing anything that moves. So since there is to be a fear there, the possums are making their way out of this location to just scramble the heck out of there. So we have Naru that is to continue to make her way with her group, and then eventually is to at some point get separated. And so eventually Naru is to accidentally land herself into a sinkhole where she is to use her tomahawk to eventually have to continue to chuck it against this piece of wood, hoping that hoping that it's going to stick to one of the wood pieces, and that Naru is going to be able to get out of this sinkhole and pull her way out. So Naru goes on to eventually make her way out of this sinkhole, and we end up seeing this sinkhole actually being used later on in the film. So Naru, of course, goes on to eventually find the predator after Naru and Petsu are to be in the midst of a bear. Naru is trying to use her bow and arrow to try and take the bear down consistently, but what can you do with a bow and arrow against a bear? And Naru, of course, doesn't have the high ground because, of course, she's not Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's a Star Wars joke. So, Naru is consistently firing these arrows at this bear to no avail, to where now Naru is having to consistently find areas to run away from this bear, to the point of her going into these logs or these wood pieces to try and hide her way from this bear. And that, of course, is when the predator is to seek out this bear, and I'm like, oh my god, this is awesome. When we finally get, like, predator versus bear, and of course, who do you think wins? Of course, the predator. The predator is to be lobbing this bear over its head, and he's like, yeah, look what I have killed, kind of thing. Even though the predator, of course, doesn't say anything, because of course he doesn't. We don't have, like, the predator going on and mimicking any of the guys, like, in the first film, as, like, this kind of joking thing. We don't do that in this movie, for whatever reason. So Naru, of course, is to try to sneak away from this predator, but eventually the predator is to spot her. Naru is to try to dunk herself. Like, she tried to dunk herself into the water to try to avoid the bear, but now Naru is trying to run off and trying to get away from this predator because of how, like, much of a threat this character is. So eventually, Naru makes her way to sneaking away to have her leg fall into this bear trap via this part of woods. She falls over, and all of a sudden, that, of course, is when the predator is to get very close to Naru, and all of a sudden, a bunch of these Europeans who are to have these muskets, these old-fashioned guns, are to blast their way into hopefully scaring off this predator. And then eventually Naru is to go on and eventually realize that the predator did not go after her because she was the weaker of the people that were around there, and there was a possibility that the predator could have gone on and killed her. Like, it even got to the point where he was grabbing onto her chain wanting to go and kill her, but he doesn't. So Naru ends up waking up next to these European men, and we have a guy named Raphael who is going on and speaking to Naru in English, and is to tell her, it's like, well, hey, like I understand that you are to go on and be dealing with this threat, this monster like thing, and Raphael is to say that we've been dealing with this also, and so maybe we should go and team up together to face this thing together. That maybe we should join forces and hope that we can take this thing down. So Naru, who is to eventually be at this camp, we eventually, of course, have the predator who is to make its way to this camp also, as we had Tebei, who is to try to free Naru, and he ends up just getting tied to a tree with Naru. when eventually the predator does come. So what happens is Naru is talking to Tebey and is willing to sacrifice her own arm to eventually free them from this tree, but she ends up making a joke about, like, instead just having this bear trap close upon this rope to break the rope. And she's like, well, yeah, I'm not as stupid as a normal animal to go on and lob off my own arm to save myself. We have a lot of times where the predator goes on and chops off arms in this movie and, like, chops off limbs. It's actually pretty cool. At certain points, we have Raphael, who is to be limping off because he is to be one half of a leg short. So we have the predator that is slicing and dicing his way through people, going on and using this net device to go and grab one of these men to Swiss cheese him, and eventually using his having the predator use his self-destruction device to kill 3 to 4 European men at one time, even though the guy who I believe is Big Beard was to realize that this is possibly a bomb, and so he runs the other direction and is to save himself from this destruction. But most of the time, we end up having the predator using the combi sticks or the combo sticks, the spears a lot. We end up having him using that more than anything else. But so eventually when Tebey and Naru get free, like, Tebey is focusing on getting a horse so they would probably get out of there. But eventually when Tebey gets this horse, he instead tries to fight off the predator, as well as eventually we have Naru, who has the rest of the people of her tribe together to try to fight off this predator, and eventually they end up all getting killed besides Naru. So, because we have Tebey, who ends up putting out a really good showing against the predator, even when the predator is to basically start cutting him down to size, we have Tebey that consistently tries every little thing to just have this thing bleed more. And Tebey is to also tell Naru that if it bleeds, we can kill it. So, like, there has to be the way to kill this thing off, but it's very difficult with the primitive weapons of which that they have for this time period. So we are to go on here and have Naru, who eventually all of her people are to be killed off. So Naru eventually finds Raphael, who is to need his wounds to be taken care of, his lobbed off leg. And so Raphael is to tell Naru how she can use this musket, this gun, to be able to fire it. And so the trade-off is that Raphael will get help from Naru for his wound to showcase the gun. So, come to find out, Naru is to realize that this gun doesn't have ammo in it, like gunpowder and so on and so forth. So, Naru, when seeing the predator, is wanting to fire off this gun, but realizing there's nothing in it, so she's like, oh crap. So, the predator goes on and gets closer and closer to Raphael, and eventually Raphael is to pretend that he's dead. Naru is to also go on and give Raphael the orange flower, this medication, and Raphael is complaining about his body is very cold. And then it's like, aha, that's where we're going to go on and have eventually Naru figuring out. It's like, oh, the predator didn't know, like, that guy was there. Aha, that's going to be my thing that I'm going to use against this predator. So, Naru goes on to eventually find one of the European men that are left, and that ends up being the guy who I believe is to be named Big Beard. So, Naru goes on to nab this guy and eventually take him to this camp. And so when this guy awakes, we of course have Naru, who is to have planned this to a T, to have this guy go and get this weapon for eventually the Predator to show up and the Predator to go on and kill Big Beard. And while we of course have the Predator focusing on this guy, we're going to have Naru, who's going to step up behind the Predator and shoot him in the head, hoping that that will kill him. The whole thing of it is, we, of course, instead have the Predator's, like, headgear or helmet or body armor that is upon his head, that ends up falling off. So we don't have technically a plasma caster that is beyond the guy's shoulder in this movie. We technically do have a plasma caster that is on the head, as we can kind of see this red kind of signia in here. So the plasma caster is technically attached to the helmet, and come to find out that ends up kind of shooting out these like darts that go into someone's body instead of like shooting out these lasers like in the other Predator films. So we have Naru that takes the Predator's helmet and is to take it, and is to eventually set this up where the sinkhole was from where Naru was before. And so the master plan is for Naru to lure the Predator into the sinkhole. So the Predator goes on to eventually follow this trail of blood to make his way into the sinkhole. And so we kind of have, of course, Naru here, who is going on and telling the Predator, kind of like Arnold did before, like kill me, I'm here, like, get me, come on. So we have the Predator that is to try to go on and charge its weapon to try and blast Naru with these kind of darts. And come to find out, the headpiece is to be located near the Predator. And so all of a sudden we see that this headpiece is to be targeting upon the Predator's own head, and then the dart ends up going through the Predator's head, killing him here. And so that's, of course, when the Predator goes on and sinks, and Naru is like, oh my god, I finally did it. And then she goes back to her tribe to eventually have some food there, and everyone seems to be happy, even though she's probably going to go have to explain to a number of people, yeah, all the people that I was with, all of them died. Yeah, went down. We also had Tabei that was kind of at some point wanting to tell Naru that she may need to go back to her tribe to hopefully maybe send some reinforcements. But like, who else could they really send after the hardships that they are to really have here? So, but yeah, so Naru, I think, goes back and doesn't really explain anything to anybody, especially about the whole alien thing, because no one would probably believe her. They'd probably just say that she was crazy. So yeah, that's how everything just kind of plays out. There is no end credit scene, I guess, for this film. Let me know in the comments below if there probably is something that I did forget about, because I'm sure there's a little detail here or there that I probably did probably misplace somewhere within this movie. I know everything is probably not going to be perfect, because there's probably certain characters that specifically you wanted me to go on and say, like, oh, well, like, I wanted you to say how that person died and so on and so forth. Like, there is the one moment, of course, we end up seeing the one Native American guy who I don't know exactly what his name was, and we had like the kind of the lasers that are to be put upon his body, and he's like, hey, what is this? And then all of a sudden he ends up getting like freaking darted in the body, and he ends up plopping down. That part was kind of cool too. And we had the other Native American character, I believe his name was Itzy, who is to be kind of the very black makeup character that was to eventually try and take out this predator character, and he ends up getting killed as well. But I thought that character was also kind of like interesting, and to the point where Naru like also kind of put her like body makeup to kind of mimic that guy. Um, but anyways, like it's kind of funny because the poster of this is to show Naru in like the green kind of predator makeup, and she never has that on her face. Like she only has that like maybe like splotches on her body. Um, but yeah, so like we also had the real cool moment when Naru uh was to eventually first see the predator, and she jumps on him and she starts like tomahawking him all over his body, and then like Naru gets off the predator, like the predator kind of like chucks Naru off him, and that's when we end up like having Naru go on and force the predator into getting into the sinkhole and eventually getting killed off here. But I just kind of wanted to add that in as a last minute thing. Uh, but yeah, really thoroughly enjoyed the whole like the axe or the tomahawk or the axe being used. Um, I'm hoping that people aren't insensitive by me saying the word tomahawk, because I could go on and say axe, but I've said tomahawk far too often. Because I know like the Braves used to go on and do like the whole chop thing, and that might be offensive to anybody. I'm also like a fraction of Native American myself, a very small fraction. So when really looking at it, like I'm hoping I'm not offending anybody. Just it is what it is. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here to make this review short so I can just quickly and easily put it out. For some reason, also goofily today again, like my Wi-Fi isn't the greatest, so we'll see how long this takes to eventually upload for today. But hopefully, I'm going to be able to get this out as well as a number of other things. We'll see. But anyways, goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.